All right, let's dive in. We're going to talk about some of the oldest, most enduring leadership roles in history. And we're going to ask a really simple question. Where did they even come from?
You know the words, right? Bishop, priest, deacon. They sound like they've just always existed. But did they? I mean, really. The story of where they came from, well, it's probably not what you think. And here's the absolute kicker. In the beginning, there was no instruction manual. Seriously, no step-by-step guide for how to build a church. The very first Christians were basically making it up as they went along, trying to create an organization from scratch. So, where do you even begin with a task that huge? Okay, so no single how-to book, but the New Testament is sprinkled with clues. And these clues tell us a lot. For starters, leadership wasn't something you could just take. It was seen as a donum, that's Latin for a divine gift. It was a calling from God, but it had to come through the community. And it was always marked by these really serious spiritual actions, prayer, fasting, and this very specific ancient gesture, the laying on of hands to confer authority. So, with those basic ideas floating around, the early church looked to one single figure as the ultimate blueprint, the original model for all ministry. And that figure? The apostle. But what did it actually mean to be an apostle? Yeah, the definition here was super specific. An apostle wasn't just any follower. This title was reserved for someone who was a direct, personal witness to the resurrected Christ. And this is the critical part. They had to be sent by him on a mission. Their whole identity was wrapped up in that one-on-one experience and that personal commission to get out there and continue his work. And what was that mission exactly? Well, it pretty much broke down into three main jobs. First, you're a missionary. You're out there announcing the gospel, founding new churches from scratch. Second, once a community is up and running, you govern it, you guide the flock, you stick with them. And third, you lead worship. You preside over the big stuff like baptism and the Eucharist. So you've got word, government, and worship. It was the whole apostolic package deal. And this idea, it just perfectly captures the heart of their role. It wasn't just about being a manager. No way. The apostle was meant to be a memoria Christi, a living, breathing memory of Christ on earth. They were the echo, the continuation of his presence after he was gone. So, okay, the apostle is the template. But as the faith just explodes across the map, something really fascinating starts to happen. You get diversity. It turns out not every community organized itself in the exact same way. You can actually see two pretty distinct models pop up. On one hand, you have the churches founded by Paul. Their leadership was way more fluid, more charismatic. It was built for being on the move, for mission work. You hear about these traveling apostles, prophets, and teachers. Paul even intentionally avoids the Jewish term presbyter. But then you look at Jerusalem, the mother church, and it's a totally different ballgame. The structure there was much more institutional. You had James leading a council of presbyters, a setup they borrowed directly from the Jewish Sanhedrin. So you've got two different contexts leading to two very different structures. And this whole diverse setup, it worked, while that first generation was still around. But it begs a massive question, doesn't it? What happens when the original apostles, the direct witnesses, are gone? Who carries the torch then? Well, the answer the church eventually landed on was this idea of succession. The mission couldn't just die out with the first wave of apostles. It had to be passed on. But the how of it all, that didn't just appear overnight. It was an idea that was forged piece by piece over decades. And you can literally watch this idea evolve in the early writings. In the late 1st century, you've got a text called the Didache that talks about communities electing their own bishops and deacons for local stable roles. That's a big shift from the traveling missionary model. Then, a little later, around 96 AD, Clement of Rome is the first guy to come right out and say that the apostles themselves appointed successors. Fast forward a few more years, and you see figures like Polycarp leading councils, but he's clearly the main guy, the single head figure. And it all kind of climaxes around the year 110 with a man named Ignatius of Antioch. And Ignatius, he is the key. His writings give us the very first crystal clear picture of that three-part hierarchy that would become the standard for, well, centuries. See, before Ignatius, you'd see words like bishop and presbyter used almost interchangeably. The vocabulary was still kind of soupy. But Ignatius comes along and starts using them as precise technical terms. He basically locks in the language, and in doing so, he locks in the structure. But what's so wild is why he set it up this way. For Ignatius, the church's structure on earth had to be a mirror of the order in heaven. So you have one bishop, and he's the principle of unity, just like God the Father is the source of unity in the Trinity. Then you have the Council of Presbyters who advise him, sort of like the College of Apostles that surrounded Christ. And finally, the deacons who serve the community, reflecting Christ himself as the ultimate servant. It's this beautiful, deeply theological vision for church government. So how long did all this take? From the very first apostles to the clearly defined three-tiered system that Ignatius lays out? About 80 years. Think about that. This was a long, organic evolution. It wasn't some top-down decision made in a boardroom overnight. And his whole journey, right, from this dynamic, charismatic movement to a structured institution, it wasn't really about a power grab or bureaucracy. At its heart, it was a survival mechanism. This hierarchy was created to do two things, and two things only: preserve the deposit of faith they got from the apostles, and hold the whole thing together, maintain unity in a religion that was growing like crazy.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thought, doesn't it? This structure, for sure, brought order and a powerful unity that helped the church survive. But it makes you wonder, what might have been lost? What happened to that spirited, maybe even a little messy, diversity of those very, very first days? It's something to think about.